The show begins before the dawn of the universe, with two angels, Crowley and Aziraphale, floating through the infinite void of space. Crowley enlists Aziraphale's help in creating a nebula filled with the light of billions of stars. Both angels admire the newly formed cosmos, and Crowley appears satisfied with his work. However, Aziraphale unexpectedly delivers bad news that God intends to introduce humans into the equation, and this universe may be destroyed in about 6,000 years. He explains that the stars will eventually become nothing more than fancy wallpapers for humans to look at. Upon hearing this, Crowley feels disheartened that all his work might end up being meaningless. He starts complaining about God and states that he shouldn't be allowed to do whatever he wants. Aziraphale, on the other hand, warns Crowley to be careful what he says, fearing that he will get in trouble for questioning God. But Crowley doesn't seem to care and is determined to put forward his case. The scene then shifts to modern-day London, where Aziraphale lives among humans in disguise and runs a small bookstore. This morning, he receives a note from Maggie, his tenant who runs a record store on his property. Aziraphale visits her, and Maggie regretfully informs him that she is leaving because she has been unable to pay rent for the past 8 months. She starts to cry, but the kind Aziraphale consoles her and forgives her debt in exchange for a few records. Elsewhere in London, we meet Crowley, who is now a demon and works for Satan. He's lounging on a park bench when he's approached by Shax, a demon who turns out to be Hell's new representative in London. She informs him that there are rumors of trouble in heaven and asks if he's aware of it. Crowley denies it, so Shax suggests he check in with his old friend Aziraphale, who might know something. However, Crowley dismisses it, claiming that he and Aziraphale are no longer in touch. In another scene, we see Maggie growing quite friendly with Nina, the owner of a nearby coffee shop, on whom she has a huge crush. Maggie tries to build up the courage to ask her out, but their conversation is abruptly interrupted when a naked man appears in the street, wearing nothing and holding a cardboard box. The strange sight attracts a huge crowd as everyone watches the man make his way to Aziraphale's bookstore. Upon seeing him, Aziraphale is stunned, but the naked man cheerfully hugs him and asks for help in realizing who he is. The angel hurriedly takes him in and throws a blanket around him to avoid drawing more attention. At this point, we learn that the naked man is called Gabriel, and he's the supreme archangel of heaven and Aziraphale's boss. However, the problem is that Gabriel has no memory of anything, and he doesn't know who he is or where he is. When Aziraphale asks why he came here, Gabriel admits he has no idea. All he knows is that he felt compelled to come here and realized something terrible was about to happen. The scared angel cautiously checks Gabriel's cardboard box, only to find it completely empty. With no clues to go on, he reluctantly reaches out to Crowley for help. In the meantime, Aziraphale instructs the archangel to go by the name Jim if anyone asks. Soon after, Aziraphale brings Crowley to the bookstore, where the demon is startled to find Gabriel, naked and wrapped in only a blanket. Aziraphale wants to help Gabriel, but Crowley is eager to get rid of him as soon as possible. He grows angry, remembering that Gabriel was his former boss who once tried to send him to hell. Despite Aziraphale's pleas, Crowley refuses to help and storms out of the bookstore in rage. Elsewhere, Nina is closing up her cafe when Maggie tries to strike up a conversation. Maggie nervously attempts to ask Nina out, but the latter quickly makes it clear she has a partner waiting for her at home. An embarrassed Maggie tries to leave when suddenly Crowley appears outside, visibly angry. He summons a powerful lightning strike that accidentally knocks out the power in Nina's cafe. This causes the doors to lock, trapping both Nina and Maggie inside with their phones dead. Nina becomes very worried, knowing her partner is possessive and will freak out if she doesn't respond to texts promptly. Meanwhile, in heaven, archangels Michael and Uriel argue over who should take charge in Gabriel's absence. Michael is eager to take on the role, while Uriel strongly opposes it. Just then, two lower-ranking angels, Aziraphale and Muriel, arrive carrying an object they've found. This turns out to be an empty matchbox from a pub called the Resurrectionist. Realizing the object is from Earth, they conclude that Gabriel must also be there. Afterward, Crowley is visited by Beelzebub, who is the leader of Hell's forces. She informs him that Gabriel is somewhere on Earth and asks if he has any idea where. Crowley lies, claiming he has no knowledge and doesn't care either. Beelzebub then tells him that if he tracks down Gabriel, he will receive a major promotion and increased power. However, she also warns that heaven plans to impose extreme sanctions on anyone involved in the archangel's disappearance. In other words, they'll be erased from the Book of Life, meaning they'll vanish as if they never existed. Upon hearing this, Crowley grows worried for Aziraphale. After all, they were once very close friends. He heads to Aziraphale's place, but on the way, notices Nina and Maggie trapped in the shop and frees them. Crowley then approaches Aziraphale and sincerely apologizes for his earlier rude behavior. He also informs him about the extreme sanctions and suggests that they need to hide Gabriel while they figure out what's going on. With this, the duo comes up with a plan to hide Gabriel from both heaven and hell. They each perform half a miracle to hide the archangel, believing that this way, no alarm bells will be triggered in either realm. Unfortunately, the trick doesn't work and an alert goes off in heaven. Aziraphale shows Michael, Uriel, and Muriel a burst of energy radiating from a specific location in London, Aziraphale's bookstore. Michael concludes that Aziraphale knows something about Gabriel and decides to pay him a visit. The following day, Aziraphale gives Gabriel the position of assistant storekeeper so that people won't get suspicious. A clueless Gabriel then begins organizing the books alphabetically while singing a particular song that catches Aziraphale's attention. He asks Gabriel where he heard the tune, but the latter claims he doesn't remember. Elsewhere, Crowley is approached once again by Shax, who informs him that Gabriel has gone missing. She threatens him with severe consequences if he has been hiding things from them. Shax also reveals that a miracle was detected at the bookstore last night and asks Crowley if he has any idea about it. Crowley, on the other hand, vehemently denies any knowledge of the miracle and Gabriel. Returning to Aziraphale, he heads to Maggie's store, where he finds her visibly upset. He asks what's wrong, and Maggie begins crying, explaining how she finally gathered the courage to ask out Nina, only to find out she's already in a relationship. She feels embarrassed, so Aziraphale comforts her and asks her about the song Gabriel was singing. Maggie reveals it's the 1957 song Every Day by an artist named Buddy Holly. She pulls out a stack of records and explains that they all trace back to a pub in Edinburgh called the Resurrectionist. Strangely, every record she sent out has magically started playing every day, causing the pub to return them. Aziraphale is stunned to hear this, and begins to suspect it could be a clue to solving the mystery of Gabriel. When Aziraphale returns to the bookstore, he finds Aziraphale, Uriel, and Michael, who have descended from heaven. They question him about Gabriel just as he shows up and cheerfully introduces himself as Jim, the store assistant. Fortunately, they don't recognize him, thanks to the miracle Crowley and Aziraphale performed the night before. Aziraphale then invites them inside, where Michael questions him about the energy surge they detected and why he performed a miracle. With no other option, Aziraphale lies and tells them a story about his tenant Maggie and her crush Nina. He reveals that Maggie is in love with Nina, but the feelings aren't mutual, leaving his tenant heartbroken. Thus, the miracle he performed the night before was meant to make the two women fall in love. The archangels believe the explanation for now, but inform Aziraphale that someone will be sent later to verify the miracle. After they leave, a panicked Aziraphale meets with Crowley at a pub to discuss the dire situation. He tells Crowley about the archangel's visit and explains that he had no choice but to lie to them. Aziraphale decides they need to actually make Nina and Maggie fall in love to make it seem like the miracle was real. Upon hearing this, Crowley suggests creating a rainstorm while the two are together, hoping the moment will make them lock eyes and realize they're meant for each other. Afterward, Aziraphale explains to Crowley about the song and its connection to a pub in Edinburgh. The two return to the bookstore, where they ask Gabriel to search his mind for any significant memories. Crowley urges him to recall the very first thing he remembers, but Gabriel struggles. After much pressure, Gabriel's eyes suddenly turn purple, and he begins reciting God's words to Job from the Bible. The duo tries to push him further, but Gabriel snaps back to reality and insists he can't remember anything. While leaving the bookstore, Crowley runs into Nina on the street, and they have a brief conversation. She mentions seeing him create lightning the night before, and asks about it, but he brushes her off and shifts the topic to Maggie. Crowley indirectly asks if they're a thing, but Nina denies it, insisting she's in a committed relationship. She adds that she and Maggie aren't even friends, and that being locked in with her last night was awful. Afterward, Aziraphale informs Crowley that he wants to take a trip to Edinburgh to follow the clue from the record. He asks to borrow Crowley's Bentley for the day and requests that the demon look after Gabriel while he's gone. Crowley is hesitant at first, but after persistent urging from Aziraphale, he finally agrees. The next day, Nina is at the coffee shop but looks distracted, constantly checking texts from her toxic partner. One of the regular customers comments that her coffee is bad when she fights with her partner. However, Nina shuts her down firmly, stating that her relationship is nobody's business. They then both notice a strange woman outside, dressed in an all-white police uniform, which takes them by surprise. It turns out to be Muriel, who arrives at the bookstore and meets Aziraphale. He wonders what she's doing there, and Muriel reveals that she has been sent by the archangels to investigate whether the miracle he performed was genuine or not. She explains that she's wearing the police uniform to avoid raising suspicion among the humans. Not long after, Crowley arrives and is amused by the angel pretending to be a police officer. She introduces herself as Inspector Constable and reveals she's a 200-year-old human. Crowley asks her various questions, which she answers poorly, making it clear it's her first time on Earth and that she doesn't understand how humans behave. To buy some time, Crowley tells her about how Aziraphale performed the miracle of making two humans fall in love. He explains that humans usually take a few days to show their feelings, so she won't be able to spot the miracle immediately. He thus asks her to wait a few days, which Muriel agrees to. Following this, Aziraphale sets off for Edinburgh while Crowley stays behind and decides to make Maggie and Nina fall in love. Meanwhile, Muriel heads to the cafe to interview Nina and check if any feelings have developed yet. The scene then shifts back to 1827, when we see Aziraphale and Crowley in Edinburgh, standing in front of a statue of Gabriel in a cemetery. They then come across a woman named Elspeth who is digging up a dead body. Crowley supports her, but Aziraphale attempts to persuade her that stealing bodies is wrong and immoral. However, the woman explains that she is living on the streets and working to support herself and her friend Morag. She sells the fresh bodies to a doctor and uses the money to buy food and shelter. With this, the duo goes with Elspeth and meets a doctor named Dalrymple, who pays money for cadavers. When Dalrymple inspects the body and notices it is turned into a skeleton and refuses to buy it, it turns out Aziraphale tampered with the body in an attempt to stop Elspeth from continuing her grave robbing. The poor girl storms out in anger, while Aziraphale and Crowley remain behind with the doctor. During their conversation, Dalrymple reveals that these corpses are actually serving a purpose. They are being used to educate and train future doctors so they can learn to save lives. The doctor shares how he once failed to save a young boy suffering from cancer, something he still deeply regrets. After hearing this, Aziraphale feels bad and decides to help Elspeth in digging up more bodies. In the present, Aziraphale finally arrives in Edinburgh and visits the Resurrectionist. He's surprised to discover it was opened in honor of the same doctor, Dalrymple. He questions the pub owner about Gabriel and shows him a drawing of the archangel. Luckily, the owner recognizes Gabriel and mentions that the man used to visit the pub, often with another companion. The scene flashes back once again to the past, where we see Aziraphale, Crowley, Elspeth, and her friend Morag returning to the cemetery to dig up more bodies. Unfortunately, tragedy strikes when Morag gets frightened by a corpse and is fatally wounded by a grave gun, a device used to prevent grave robbing. The poor woman soon succumbs to her injuries and dies, leaving Elspeth devastated. However, Aziraphale is shocked when Elspeth decides to take her friend's body to the doctor in exchange for money. Later, Elspeth sells the body to the doctor, during which she secretly steals a bottle of laudanum from his office. Afterward, she tells Aziraphale and Crowley that she has decided to drink the poison in order to join Morag in heaven. However, Crowley stops her from doing so, and ends up drinking the laudanum himself. This causes him to first shrink and then grow to a giant size. The giant demon declares that taking your own life is a sin, and orders Aziraphale to give all his money to Elspeth. The angel agrees and hands her 90 guineas, which is more than enough for her to live a comfortable life. Elspeth tearfully thanks them, and Aziraphale admires his demon friend for the good deed. Unfortunately, Crowley is then sucked down to hell to face punishment for his actions. In the present, Aziraphale arrives at the same cemetery and borrows a phone from a passerby. He calls Crowley to give him an update on his latest findings. However, Crowley abruptly ends the call when he spots Nina and Maggie together in the distance. Maggie confronts Nina for ignoring her, but the latter apologizes and explains that's not the case. She reveals that her partner suspects her of having an affair ever since they were locked in the shop together. This disappoints Maggie, as they don't have that kind of relationship. Meanwhile, Crowley summons his powers and brings on a sudden downpour, hoping to spark romance between the two. Nina casually remarks that she probably isn't Maggie's type, but the latter says she is. As their eyes meet, Crowley excitedly cheers for them from inside the shop. However, just then, the cafe's roof panel collapses, soaking them both in the rain. An annoyed Nina storms off, with Maggie quickly hurrying after her. Upon seeing all this, a disappointed Crowley turns back to Gabriel, muttering that his tempest didn't quite hit the mark. When Gabriel hears the word tempest, he enters a trance-like state and reveals a prophecy about an impending apocalypse in which the dead will rise from the grave. But he soon snaps back to reality and can't remember what he just said. As if things couldn't get any worse, Shax shows up at the front door of the bookstore. She warns him that hell knows he and Aziraphale are hiding the archangel. She demands entry to the shop, but it turns out she can't step inside without an invitation, as she's a demon. Shax then threatens Crowley that the full fury of hell will soon be unleashed on his angelic friend. However, an unfazed Crowley ignores her words and slams the door in her face. Afterward, an angry Crowley confronts Gabriel for causing trouble and making their lives difficult. He warns Gabriel that if any harm comes to his friend Aziraphale, he will not spare him. But the clueless archangel doesn't understand what he's talking about, making Crowley realize his threats are futile. Don't forget to subscribe, hit 1,500 likes, or drop 100 comments if you want to see the next part.